Alright guys, so just a couple of months ago, it was announced that McLaren and Daniel Ricciardo had mutually agreed to terminate their contract together for 2023. This came after a pretty terrible season for Danny Ric. He was absolutely demolished by his teammate Lando Norris, who was in his 4th season in F1, as opposed to Ricciardo, who was in his 11th season. Daniel had almost triple the experience Lando had, and so because of that, and the fact that he's considered one of the greatest drivers on the grid, was considered one of the greatest drivers on the grid, you'd expect Ricciardo to be able to adapt quite quickly to the McLaren he was given and beat Norris with room to spare. But that's not how it went. For 2 whole seasons as a Daniel Ricciardo fan, race weekends were a pain, week in and week out. The only time things were looking decent was in the first 2 races of the 2021 season, where Daniel looked like he rightfully had the overall pace advantage, and at Monza, where of course he won the race in spectacular fashion. But even then, on both occasions, Lando was extremely close to Daniel, and at Monza, I have no doubts that if Norris decided to attack Ricciardo in the final stages of the race, he could have had that win in the bag instead of Daniel. Now, I'm happy that didn't happen, because like I said, I'm a Ricciardo fan, but still, just the thought that even at his highest points with McLaren, Norris was still on par with or even faster than Ricciardo hurts. So obviously Ricciardo left, and for the best, because any more of that would simply have been career suicide. Already his reputation has taken a huge hit, so I'm glad he left. And now, he's back at Red Bull, but not as the second driver, no. I think it was already going to be tricky enough to find a seat at any team after what happened last season. No, Daniel Ricciardo is going to be the reserve driver at Red Bull next season. You already know that, it's old news at this point, and if you didn't, then surprise. But that isn't the problem Ricciardo is about to face. Sure, a third driver role isn't that great. Not ideal at all for someone like Daniel, who a couple of years ago was hoping for a chance at the title. But no, that's not the issue at hand. In fact, it's completely out of Ricciardo's hands. And that problem is this man right here, Oscar Piastri. Again, you probably already know that. Oscar will be the man replacing Ricciardo at McLaren next season. So you might be asking yourself, how does that pose a threat to Ricciardo in any way? Well, that I'll tell you, but first I just want to say that if you've enjoyed this video so far and you wouldn't mind seeing more content just like it, please consider hitting that like button to help spread this video some more, and also maybe even consider subscribing. But anyway, back to the video. Like I was saying, Ricciardo's greatest threat for next season is Piastri. No, they won't be racing on track against each other, but what Oscar will be doing is racing in a similar car to what Daniel drove this season, against the same teammate Daniel lost to by a mile for 2 years in a row. See where this is going? Piastri, as many of you already know, is going to be a rookie, his first season in F1. Zero experience other than a few tests here and there. Sure, he did fly through the junior categories, winning a good bunch of them, and he is seen by many as one of the more exciting talents to come up in the last few years. But you do have to remember that in the same way, Daniel was looked at as one of the top drivers on the grid. So what will it look like for Ricciardo if Piastri jumps in that car next season, gets to grips with it like he never managed to in 2 full seasons, and finishes the season off close to Lando or even higher than Norris in the standings? Yeah, I doubt he can beat Lando in his rookie season. That would look bad for Norris and even worse for Ricciardo. But even if he just qualifies slightly off Lando's pace on average and maybe finishes a couple of positions behind on average, that alone will show that he can to some extent drive that McLaren well. Unlike Ricciardo for 2 whole seasons. And I don't know, if you ask me, that would do some serious damage to the already fragile reputation of Daniel Ricciardo. If Piastri does show he can adapt and drive a car better than a man who drove for 11 seasons straight and has infinite times more experience than he does, I think that could potentially prevent Ricciardo from finding another seat in future. Because put it this way, I don't think Daniel has just suddenly become slow. I doubt he simply lost all talent overnight. That just doesn't really happen. Sure, mentally he has said he's struggled, but even then, I don't think that that's what's been holding him back so much this whole time. I honestly just think that he couldn't adapt his driving style to suit the design philosophy that McLaren have been going for. It's known that McLaren have been making a very rear gripping car, so in other words, it's an understeery car. Of course, it's a lot more complicated than that, but in simple terms, I'd say it's enough for now. Because all you need to know is that Ricciardo prefers a more oversteery car. In fact, his whole driving style is formed around an oversteer philosophy, so naturally it didn't work at McLaren, and so he wasn't quick. But teams won't want to risk that. They don't want to gamble a whole season on whether or not Daniel will be able to drive their car to the best of his abilities, especially not the top teams, like his current one, Red Bull, which he clearly wants to get back in with on track. But it'll only look this way for Daniel if Piastri gets on top of things next season. If he doesn't, the tables will be turned and it will instead benefit Ricciardo. How? Well, that's because if nor Piastri or Ricciardo could get to grips with that car, but the one other driver who's been at the team for longest seems to be able to get around with it just fine, in fact really well, what does that tell us? I'll tell you what, it tells us that the McLarens were built around Lando's driving style, and because of that, it was extra hard for the other drivers to adapt their driving style to that car, in turn making them look slower than they actually are. But like I said, this will only be the case if Piastri does way worse than Lando next season. But even then, there's a lot of room for error because you have to remember that Piastri will be a rookie at the end of the day. So if he does do worse, people may just put that down to Oscar just being inexperienced rather than the car being made to suit Lando. And I wouldn't blame them for saying that because they'd be right in a way. So that's why for this to all look good on Ricciardo's end, Piastri will have to do noticeably worse than Ricciardo. Probably even worse than Ricciardo did to make it noticeable. So that's why I say it's more of a problem for Daniel rather than an opportunity. But to find out, we're just gonna have to wait for next season and see for ourselves. And that's just another reason why I'm hyped for next season. Also, I'm just a big fan of the sport, so how could I not be? But that was all my opinion, guys. Do you agree? Do you not? Be sure to let me know down in the comments below. It really helps out a lot with the YouTube algorithm if you do so. Also, if you did enjoy this video at any point at all, please consider liking and more importantly subscribing to help with the growth of this channel. If you do that, thank you so much, and either way, thank you all so much for watching, and on that note, I do hope you all have a blessed night, and I'll catch you all next time.